Have you ever spent years of your life, decades of your life, trying to do everything in your power to make other people happy? Doing everything in your power to avoid conflict at all costs, meaning you were even willing to amputate pieces of your authentic self if it brought about conflict. But then all of a sudden you reached a point where you just couldn't anymore. And it might seem like not only did you stop trying to make other people happy, but in a way it almost feels like you stopped living. You stopped reacting. You stopped feeling like you could be you. And so now you're dealing with numbness, feeling tired all the time, feeling disconnected from life, and feeling like somebody else is living your life for you. If this resonates, then you know what it's like to shift out of fawning and into freeze. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today.
For those of you that don't know me, my name is Michelle. I'm a somatic experiencing practitioner and the founder of the School of Transformation, which is where I meet live on Zoom every week with survivors from all over the world of childhood trauma. Here on my YouTube channel, we talk about what healing is about, what it looks like, the symptoms of unhealed trauma. But in the School of Transformation, we do the inner healing together. So if you're ready to take the next step, make sure you join me weekly on Zoom.
So in my case, I lived most of my childhood in the fawn trauma response because I had a very unpredictable hot and cold upbringing. There was a lot of chaos. And so our nervous system is so wise that from a very young age, I know with myself, I learned very young that I needed to play small to stay safe. I needed to make others happy, to feel some sort of connection, and in that way stay safe. So I became the peacemaker. I became the fixer. I became the one that absorbed everyone else's emotions because they were too emotionally unavailable to feel them themselves, and therefore I was avoiding the explosions that would come about if they had to feel their own feelings. So to understand the fawn trauma response is partial freeze, because we freeze our authenticity, and then it's also partially social engage. So we socially engage in a way that makes someone else happy in order to achieve safety. Well, that response, because it was so necessary in my childhood, it became an unconscious pattern. I didn't know I was fawning. I thought that was who I was. And then it followed me into my adult life. And so I found myself in relationships with people that expected me to fawn to make them happy, that expected me to absorb all emotions so that they didn't have to feel them themselves, right? So I found myself in these toxic relationships because that pattern unconsciously felt familiar. But here's what we have to learn and understand as adults. Fawning was a brilliant strategy when we were children. It was the only thing we could do. We were too young to do anything else. However, in our adult life, fawning doesn't work, right? If you find yourself fawning in relationships, I would love to know if anyone ever found that, oh, when I fawn and I completely sacrifice myself, it creates a healthy, happy relationship. Because I know it doesn't work. No amount of fawning will ever bring real peace and happiness in a relationship, because if you're in a relationship with somebody that expects you to fawn, their end goal is not the same as your end goal. You're fawning to find happiness and safety and connection. They're forcing you or wanting you to fawn, not so that there can be an end goal of happiness, but because the chaos suits them. They want the chaos to continue. So therefore, a person that fawns with a person that expects the other person to fawn will never create a happy, healthy relationship because they have two different end games. Fawning doesn't work as an adult. In fact, it brings about more disconnection and instability. And in my case, here's what happened. Because my fawning wasn't working, it wasn't creating happiness, and the instability was growing, eventually something happened in that relationship. The amount of aggression and physical altercation that took place caused my nervous system to do something that I had no idea it could do. It literally flung me out of fawning and thrust me into freeze. And it happened from one day to the next. It was like I went to sleep one person, a person that was fawning, trying to find safety, to a person that woke up in freeze and didn't know how to live life anymore as who I really was. It was almost like that chip of authenticity was no longer partially available to me like it was with the fawning, right? Fawning is partial freeze, partial you. Well, none of that was no longer available to me. And so I woke up feeling so disconnected. I was numb. I felt like I was living out of my body, watching someone else live my life for me. I now know, looking back, that somebody else was living my life for me, and that was my protective self. My protective self had flung my authentic self in the trunk of the car and was now driving my life for me without my conscious consent. At the time, I had no idea why that happened, what was happening inside of me. And to be honest, the not understanding it only fueled my anxiety even more. Understanding it allowed me to lessen the activation in my body. And it also helped me to understand that there was something I could do about it. So that's why I'm sharing this with you. So let's first understand why the nervous system would shift gears like that. When we feel unsafe, whether physically or emotionally, we go through responses in this order. Number one, our social engagement. Can I connect? If the answer is no, we go on to number two. Can I change it or escape it? In other words, can I go into fight or flight? If the answer is no, we go down to number three. Can I appease or please to help me to stay safe, which is the fawn trauma response? And if that won't work, the last response we go to, the last gear we go to in our nervous system is freeze, which is I've tried everything and there's no way out. So the freeze response isn't failure. It's the body's final attempt at protection. In fact, it's what animals do when they can't escape. And so you're still alive, but you shut down emotionally, mentally, and even physically. Something that causes your body to shift gears from fawn to freeze is chronic emotional invalidation. So you're fawning and you're fawning and you're trying to create safety, you're trying to create connection, and it doesn't work. And so there's pain and there's more pain. Well, the nervous system starts noticing that. It's like you've poured everything out and it isn't working. It's time to shut down, because the amount of pain that keeps coming in is registered as too much threat. Another reason why your body might force a gear shift from fawn to freeze is if it's constant betrayal and boundary violations. So for example, if you're a child and your boundaries are being crossed, and it's the same thing as an adult. You're trying harder, you're over-explaining, you're trying to find the secret formula to make this person happy, and over, there's nothing but rupture, more rupture, and no repair. Your body will force you into freeze to avoid the accumulative pain that is happening. And that kind of pushes me into the third reason why your body would force a gear shift, is if there is so much stress, there's so much now activation in your body without any rest and repair. The truth is, fawning requires energy. And if you're never getting any rest and repair, eventually your body's going to run out of gas, run out of fuel. And so it pushes you into freeze and shuts you down, very much like a phone going into battery saver mode. And so when you get shifted into freeze, what that looks like is you might feel very numb and disconnected from your feelings. You might feel very low motivation and almost like you're watching your life instead of actually living it. You'll notice it sometimes in your speech, where you'll have a very flat affect, and you may have trouble remembering things. There's a lot of brain fog when it comes to the freeze trauma response. You might feel disconnected from your body. You might even feel depressed, because remember, freeze is stifling everything. And so it's trying to stifle pain. But in stifling pain, we can't just selectively stifle. The body is actually forced to stifle everything, including joy, love, passion, and creativity. So it feels very much like depression, and we can be absolutely exhausted. And it's an exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to be able to satisfy. When we don't understand that we're in a freeze trauma response and we wind up staying stuck in freeze for a long period of time, it affects every aspect of our life. Our relationships feel draining. Goals feel impossible. In fact, forget about setting a goal. We're trying to live the next 5 minutes. Our identity feels unclear. We don't know who we are anymore. And we lose touch with ourselves, with our needs, our voice, our passions. What happened to me and what I don't want to happen to anyone else is I reached a point where I was like, well, I guess this is just who I am now. But it wasn't who I was. It was who I had to be to survive too much for too long. And the good news, what I learned and what I love sharing with others, is that you can break out of freeze and you can step back into your authentic self. Something I hear a lot of people say or comment on after a video like this is like, okay, yes, I get this. It totally resonates. Now what? So I want to give you some tips on how you can begin supporting your body, but I want to be extremely transparent. Coming out of freeze can be extremely overwhelming, because underneath freeze is not stillness. Underneath freeze is the fight or flight energy that your body wanted to go to, but the freeze came and stifled and froze underneath. And so coming out of freeze involves working with that stuck survival energy, and that can feel overwhelming. So having support when you do this work is extremely important. It's why I talk about the School of Transformation till I'm blue in the face, because it's a membership program that not only is affordable, but that also provides live assistance. I am there live with you every week on Zoom doing this work with you, because the co-regulation in a group setting or with somebody one-on-one is so helpful to a traumatized nervous system. So again, right now until July 11th, I actually have a 30% off sale. So for $77 a month, you can join me 7 to 10 meetings every month in the School of Transformation. So if you're looking for extra affordable support, make sure you check out the link above. In the meantime, here are some tips that could help. The first is to remember that you cannot heal from freeze through force. You cannot whip your body to do what you want it to do. Instead, you have to learn how to have compassion and patience with your body and build the capacity to be with the strong emotions that your body has frozen. So it's kind of like going to the gym. If I want to lift 50 pounds, I don't start with 50 pounds. I find my capacity. My capacity to lift might be at 10. Well, that's not because I'm weak. That's just where my capacity is at the moment. And now I can build and strengthen it. It's how we want to work with freeze as well. Tip number 2 is less is more. So for example, freeze stopped me from doing things that I loved. Now, when I first started healing and trying to force my body, I tried to force it to do what I loved, but it was at too high of a capacity. So less meant I had to learn how to feel safe in the small things, in the cup of warm tea or coffee that I would drink in the morning, in the sitting outside and feeling the sun on my skin. In little doses, my body had to learn that I can feel the safety and the shoe's not going to drop. And nothing horrible is going to happen. And then I could move more and more towards the things that I longed to do for once I was out of freeze. And the last tip was learning how to orient to the present, learning how to help my nervous system to taste the now. If there were places in my body that were still frozen, those places had no idea about anything in my present life. They were still living in the past. They were still tasting the then. And so I had to orient and build my nervous system capacity to be in the now and kind of show my nervous system, kind of like you show a small child that's like, there's someone under the bed. And logically, you're like, there's no one there. But no amount of logic reaches the child until you come with them and you're like, look, see? And the child now sees, they orient to what's under their bed and their body feels the safety. Well, we have to orient to our surroundings and help our nervous system to see where we are in the present moment and that the trauma is in the past and it's not happening now. If you try any of those tips, I would love to hear how it goes for you in the comments below. And remember, if your nervous system has gone from fawn to freeze, please remember it's not the end of the story. It's just a chapter. And the next chapter, it's the one where you come back home to yourself, not by force, but by building safety, capacity, and self-trust, one gentle step at a time. You don't need to try harder. You need to feel safer. Last reminder, check out the School of Transformation. Your healing is possible and you do not have to do it alone.